Since we were just talking about Bitcoin, I want to read this article briefly about no more 4-year cycles, 5 things to know in Bitcoin this week, coming out of Cointelegraph. Now, you guys know that I have been against the 4-year cycle theory for the last year and change, and the reason that I have been, well, let me back up. What is the 4-year cycle? Well, Bitcoin has a block halving every single 4 years. What that means is that the reward that the miners gets cut in half every 4 years. If I remember correctly, it's at 6.25 Bitcoin right now. At the next halving, it'll be 3.125 Bitcoin per block. That's what the Bitcoin miners are given as a reward. They also generate revenue through the fee structure of Bitcoin. Because there is scarcity in the Bitcoin network, you have to pay money to transact on it, which is how the entire mining economy works, which is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So the idea is that mining becomes more difficult as the revenue for the miners goes down because of the block halving. So over the last 12 years on Bitcoin, if you look at it, you basically see that every 4 years or so, we see a peak. You can see that between these two all-time highs, you have about 1,500 days, which is roughly 4 years. So there's this theory that every 4 years, the market goes through a bull market, and then our bull market that we're in right now should be coming to an end, leading into a bear market soon, because the halving took place back in 2020. We're about a year and a half past the halving, so we should be seeing a retracement, or actually, it's almost 2 years past the halving now. We should be seeing a bear market. What this article is saying is that the 4-year cycles seem to be broken. I'm not going to read all of this. You guys can pause this if you want, but there's one major thing I want to point out here, which is from the analyst Willy Woo. He says, we're likely seeing the first signs of the last cycle thesis playing out. 3 relatively short bull and bear markets have transpired since the 2019 bottom already, i.e. no more 4-year cycles. And he shows right here in his chart an idea of what the new market will look like in Bitcoin, where we saw one bull market in 2010 starting, another bull market starting in 2012, and then another one starting in 2014-15. And then we are currently seeing multiple small bull markets and bear markets taking place. And instead of massive bull markets, bear markets, we're seeing something more akin to what the stock market does, which is it basically just goes up and to the right forever. And then we see small little corrections that make up about 10% of the time. But in general, the market is up and to the right. Willy Woo is basically saying that since the 4-year halving event is no longer as important as it was, we are now going to see, instead of a predictable walk of demand and supply governed by simple 4-year halvings, we're now seeing an unpredictable walk of demand and supply from complex ecosystem until we hit saturation. So what he's basically saying is that instead of the 4-year cycle being determined by the block halving, there are so many other factors going into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency right now that drive the economy of the cryptocurrency industry. I've been saying this for about a year and a half. When you look at Bitcoin, there is so much going on here that was not here 4.5 years ago. Yeah, Kelly, who is, he's in the other room, but he's watching right now. He can attest to this in chat. The space right now is so much more complex and complicated than it was when I got into the space July 31st, 2017. This summer, I will have been in crypto for 5 years. I've watched the growth of this industry. It was nowhere near as complex when I got in. DeFi was not even a word that anybody knew, had ever heard of. NFTs you'd never heard of. Metaverse you never heard of. Decentralized applications were barely understood. They were being talked about, but they didn't even really exist. It was the very genesis of the current market. It was a fragment of what it is now. It was a 2-year-old right now compared to Bitcoin graduating college today. There were so few applications that did anything back then, and the space was full of scams. Back then, there were only a few things driving the price action of Bitcoin. 1, China banning Bitcoin every 2 weeks. 2, Bitcoin's halving. 3, Ethereum somehow coming out of nowhere in early 2017 and gobbling up market dominance away from Bitcoin. There was basically nothing to drive the price of Bitcoin except those few fundamentals. Now, this is a fully fledged trillion-dollar ecosystem and economy that world governments are involved in. This has so many more inputs right now than it used to. It used to be that Bitcoin had maybe 5 or 10 major important inputs, such as Intercontinental Exchange adopting Bitcoin by creating BACT, or Bitcoin futures launching at the end of 2017 on CBOE, then moving to CME. Those were the few inputs that were impacting Bitcoin's price. Now there's millions of inputs. There are nation states adopting Bitcoin. There are countries getting into it. There are sovereigns getting into it. There are banks getting into it. There are so many things impacting Bitcoin's supply, demand, and its price. And what we're seeing here is that should be leading to the breakdown of the 4-year cycle, because Compared to the whole, the halving of Bitcoin is now less important because there's more inputs, so that predictably lowers proportionally the amount of importance that the Bitcoin halving has. And also, as Bitcoin halvings, well, get smaller, we see that it has less of an impact because more of the miners' revenue is coming from fees anyway, so it's less important in the first place. So this 4-year cycle, there's two ways to look at it. Either one, the 4-year cycle was never determined by the Bitcoin halving in the first place, and it was coincidence. Or two, the 4-year cycle was determined by the Bitcoin halving, and now the Bitcoin halving is asymptotically approaching not mattering at all, and it's leading to the Bitcoin market starting to move to the upside in a more steady way rather than these massive bull markets and bear markets as growth in the industry occurs. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. That is likely going to be what's confusing you if you're wondering why Bitcoin is trading sideways for a year here and it's not going into a major bear market, but it's also not continuing into a bull market. I think the way the market has worked in the last year and a half is a symptom of this previous trend that we've all gotten used to completely breaking down. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. Tim, what is your thoughts on the 4-year cycle? Do you think that we're moving into this last cycle phase that Willy Woo is talking about?
Yeah, well, so again, I've only been in crypto now for 2 years and some change. So I haven't gotten to see the 4-year cycles play out over and over and over again. But when I'm looking at the back analysis, this is something I've been saying now for a while that I'm watching this, I was like, I think what we perceive as bull and bear markets is changing. Like I actually, in hindsight, we could say that what we saw happen in the summer of 2021 was a mini bear market. And then we saw a bull rally. And then, I would actually, if we're willing to start changing what we call a bear market and bull market, I would concede that what we just saw happen going from 69,000 down again to the lower 30s could have been a bear market. But it's not the traditional one that people usually are referring to. So now you're getting into a tic-tacky debate about definitions. But what I do think is, when you also look at what we see in the past versus what we see now, I saw an article the other day that's something like, I think 4% of the entire world's population holds some form of crypto. But I guarantee you the number of people who know it is a massive number. It's probably not 100%. There's obviously places in the world where they don't have access to information like that. But I would imagine if you were to find the percentage of people in the world that at least know what crypto is, that number is extremely way higher than it used to be. And so what we're actually finding now is the education is the key level. Where before it was a lot of select few people, I'm sure the number of people who actually understood what crypto was 4 years ago was extremely small. Now it's, all right, I understand that crypto exists. I understand that people like it, but why do they like it? Is it something I really need? What we're going to see happen over the next couple of years is not going to allow for 4-year cycles because it's going to be all about people actually learning more and deciding when to get in, when to get out, and ultimately get more people getting in than getting out. And the price is just going to continue to go up and up and to the right. And you will see seasons where Bitcoin and cryptos get a little overextended. They're a little overbought. They're higher than what they really should be at the time. And so we're going to see 40, 50, maybe even at times 60% corrections, but it's still going to be setting higher lows because the pumps and the people getting in are going to be so exponentially high that when we do see a 60% dip, it's still setting a higher low, similar to what we're seeing right now. Bitcoin down close to 50%, and yet it's still a higher low than what we've seen over the last couple of years. That's what I think we're going to go into, just as you were talking about in that chart, and I think you said it was Willy Woo who put it there. Yeah. I think we're going to start seeing, instead of years of bull markets and years of bear markets, I think we're going to start seeing months and then potentially even at times weeks, because there's going to be times where people really, really are all about it, and really, really not about it. And eventually it's going to start leveling out, especially Bitcoin, when people start actually using it, like we see now El Salvador, we see Honduras, Malaysia, and some other countries looking at potentially even making it legal tender. We're going to see it start leveling out, similar to what we see with gold and other commodities like that.
Absolutely, and I think that is a trend that you're going to see continue. You're going to see a continuation of major fundamental developments that don't have an impact today, but that have huge impacts over the next 10 years. And then you're going to see those start to compound on each other. And then that's where you see parabolic growth, is when you see a multitude of different factors that have major implications, but not today, but they have major implications in the underlying fundamentals and intrinsic value space of Bitcoin. That will lead to a major growth in the space. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, you should definitely consider subscribing, because we're trying to help you become financially free in these cryptocurrency markets. And also consider following us on Twitter @CryptoJeb for more updates on the price of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Peace.